Okay, so this project is called Merri Green, and it's a project that's in Northcote. The site is this parcel of land here. It's bounded to the west by Merri Creek and to the north by the Northcote Golf Course. The history of the site is that it was a clay pit and quarry in the early days, and then that was, once the clay ran out, it became a landfill site. Then that was bought by council and it was capped with a concrete cap, and it became a council depot and general industrial site for many years. Our client purchased it in 2010. And along with the neighbour on this site to the right, they had the industrial land rezoned in 2015, which is when we started working on the project. And then the residents moved in 2021, so it was quite a tortured process throughout. This is just an example of what it was on the streetscape. Our client was an architect, which was an interesting proposition for us. He had ideas of wanting to create a development where his daughters could live. So he was very interested in retaining 4 of the dwellings for his daughters. And so he had quite a lot of engagement, I suppose, with wanting to do a really interesting project. He had previously tried to work the site out himself. I mean, his background was single residential, so it wasn't really the scale of the project. And he had come up with a master plan of 27 townhouses. Unfortunately, that wasn't financially viable for him and the site and the investors. So he came to us on the back of some of our work and asked us what we felt we could do with the site. The master plan we recut and introduced 29 apartments to the east, which is on this eastern wing here, and retained the 20 townhouses fronting the golf course and the creek. A key consideration for this was how we could get the apartment building to work without disturbing the capped site. It was very contaminated. So we had to come up with a solution where there was no basement car parking. So that had some significant implications on how the master plan would work with the ground plane. And the other key consideration was, because of its proximity to Merri Creek, there was a lot of regulations around how the building was viewed from the creek, and also thereby for the golf course. So we approached those two kind of key considerations separately. We tried to create a development that didn't look like a series of townhouses fronting a creek and a golf course. And because they were facing north and west, there were some higher elements of solar gain and things like that. So we introduced a continuous timber screen that wrapped around the north and the west of the townhouses that attempted to blur that kind of that regular townhouse sort of rhythm that you get when you just have a series of parapets and things. So this spotted gum screen, which was operable and provided shade and privacy, wrapped the whole perimeter along the north and the west. And it was really about trying to blur that distinction of what it looked like. The idea behind the timber was that when viewed through the strands of gum trees, this timber would grey off, and it would just sort of like blur the boundaries and the definition of the houses to the golf course and to the creek. As I mentioned before, because we didn't have, this is an example of the screen from the golf course. So it really just tries to kind of envelop the whole site and provide a bit of unity to it. The other big key with this master plan decision of not having basement car parking meant that we were going to have quite a lot of vehicle movement through the site. And we wanted to sort of think about how that could be dealt with in a way that didn't, create this sort of concrete driveway with curbs and that sort of thing. So we worked with the landscape architect to create this ground plane that had no curbs, it had gardens interspersed, it had detail, and it wasn't, it was really about trying to provide a sort of a mixed use space. given that it was going to have so much vehicle movement through the space. So, you know, I think it's been a really interesting part of the development, because it's not, it does have this sort of dual use. Sure, there's car movements, but there's been community kind of gatherings and things out there, and it sort of helps to kind of integrate the buildings into the site. So they were the two kind of key considerations around how the site could be kind of developed. The dwellings themselves, as I mentioned earlier, the client was keen to retain 4 of the dwellings for his daughters, and so he was sort of he tasked us with coming up with designs that were, he called them small format forever homes. So they were ideas that, you know, these were homes that were large enough and spacious enough for people at whatever stage of life that they could, you know, take an apartment or a townhouse, and that could be their sort of forever home. So the level of design was quite high, and the level of detail was quite high. You know, the spaces were all quite large, much larger than what, you know, some of our previous developer client work was. I think this was like an 8.4 metre grid for some of the townhouses. And then equally with the apartments, you know, it was only 29 apartments, but we had 2 separate cores, which allowed the building to feel much smaller and more intimate than what it was. And all the, you know, in 2015, you know, when we commenced this design, you know, things like removing all the condensers off the balconies and oversized balconies and things like that were kind of, you know, they weren't typical as they are today. So it was really approached from this idea that these were really high quality homes. And I suppose that was kind of borne out by the fact that they sold out in 3 weeks to 90% owner occupiers, which was pretty impressive at the time. So I'll just take you through some of the interior. So this kind of speaks to that idea of the high quality of the design. So these are some of the interiors. We worked with recycled black butt, you know, super beautiful high ceilings, custom joinery options that were allowed, that purchasers could take the upgrades on. These kind of lovely spatial characteristics that you don't necessarily get in every townhouse development or apartment. And you can sort of see this, how it just sort of nestles in to that quite special site bounded by the golf course and the creek, and that idea that it just sort of sits fairly harmoniously, notwithstanding the new bridge that went in after we designed the project. But yeah, so that's pretty much it.